Jan, as past chair, has decided me to help with running the meeting when I go wrong. So, I wanted to start by introducing people first. There was a request to go around the table. So maybe we start with those physically here first, and then we will go online on the team. So start there.
So I'm just visiting, listening in today. Eric Adair, Economic Development Manager with the City of Sherwood.
Senior Industry Advisor here for the on-campus program. Before that, so I said
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Amana Reddy. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Yansolve Tech. We're a primarily health and human services solutions company.
I'm Howard Burns. I work at Oregon State University. I'm their Senior Director of Corporate and Workforce Education.
Lisa Lizinovich, I run the Oregon Bioscience Association.
I am Anne Mercereau, and I'm the past chair of this great group.
I'm Venkat. I'm currently vice chair. I've spent 30 years in the technology industry and happy to be here today.
Steve Johnson, my company MBCB Consultants, for research consulting firm that's focused on minority workforce development. And we'll be presenting the DEIA things for the governor's housing initiative today.
And Craig Wald, the Hacking Future Ready Oregon manufacturing workforce strategist.
Good afternoon, Jonathan Scrimenti, staff member at Oregon Commission on Employment.
Hi, everyone. David Gerstenfeld, Director of the Oregon Employment Department.
I'm Ashley Wilson. You might have seen my name in emails between October and December, but I'm support staff for tech, and I'm just here to learn more about WTDB. Nice to meet you.
Clay Martin. I am also staff at TAC.
My name is Aaliyah Sobolowski. I am staff of tech and board admin for this meeting.
Okay. Thank you. And so maybe we should go online now and ask for some introductions. I just logged into Teams, so I'm going to read out names in alphabetical order as they show up on my screen. So Andrew.
Yes, hello. So I'm Andrew Dyke. I'm an economist and partner at Echo Northwest, and with my colleague Jade Aguilar, we'll be presenting just a very quick overview of our housing production workforce study today.
And Ben Cannon, are you here?
Yeah, hi, everybody. Ben Cannon, Executive Director of the HEC.
And I lost my team's questions. Aliyah, are you able to read out names in the participant list?
Next I have on my list is Charlie Hopewell.
Charlie, are you here?
Trying to hit my mute button. Charlie Hopewell, retired from representing industry and also co-chair of the Workforce Readiness Committee.
Craig Pope.
Good afternoon, everyone. Craig Pope, Polk County Commissioner and Chief Local Elected Official for the Mid-Willamette Valley Willamette Workforce Partners.
Dr. Bennings.
Good afternoon, everyone. Adrian Bennings, President of Portland Community College, member of the Workforce Talent Development Board.
Melissa Drew. Apologies. Right.
It's all right. Good afternoon, everyone. Melissa Drugi with Business Oregon as the Business Services Director and serving on the board.
Heather Dessart.
Good morning, everyone. Heather Dessart, Executive Director and CEO of Northwest Oregon Works, local workforce development board serving Columbia, Clatsop, Tillamook, Lincoln, and Benton counties.
Jade Aguilar.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jade Aguilar. I am a sociologist and a partner at Echo Northwest, here to present on our work with the housing production workforce.
Jana Benton.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jana Benton. I'm the Executive Director of the Oregon Center for Nursing. We're a nonprofit organization that looks at the nursing workforce throughout the state of Oregon. And I'm a member of the board.
Kim Parker Uranus.
Hi, everybody. Kim Parker, Jadenas, Executive Director, CEO of Willamette Workforce Partnership, the workforce development board that serves the Mid-Willamette Valley. and I am on the board representing the Oregon Workforce Partnership, which is the association of the 9 local workforce development boards. Good to see everybody.
Chris Latimer.
Hello, everyone. Chris Latimer, Training and Development Director for Knife River Corporation. I'm on the Workforce Talent Development Board and also Willamette Workforce Partnership.
And Chris, is today a big day for you?
Maybe. It's not.
It's Chris's birthday today.
Oh, that's great. So
Happy birthday.
my crew got me this beautiful bouquet, so it's a great day.
Great.
All right, next we have Donna Llewellyn.
Hi, everyone. I'm Donna Llewellyn. I'm the Director of Office of Community Colleges and Workforce Development, and I serve on the board in my role as the State Director of the Adult Education and Family Literacy Act, Title II.
Lori Silverman.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lori Silverman with Age Plus. We advocate for older adults. And congratulations, Chris. We are all aging, so.
Neelam Gupta.
Hi, everyone. Neelam Gupta. I'm the Director of Clinical Supports, Integration, and Workforce at the Oregon Health Authority.
Todd Nell.
Hi, everyone. Todd Nell, Director of the Workforce and Talent Development Board. Sherry Dunn and I are back in DC right now with the National Governors Association Winter Symposium, although it seems springy already. Sherry wanted me to send her regrets for being unable to attend, but she's been roped into the last session of the convening and is tied up. So glad to be here. Thank you.
Candy Quintal.
Good afternoon. My name is Candy Quintal. I am the program manager for our self-sufficiency program employment and training teams with the Oregon Department of Human Services.
Darla Pollywall. Darla, we cannot hear you. Okay, for now, let's move on to Vic Strapp.
Hi, everyone. I'm Vic Schaaf. I'm the legislative aide for Representative High Pham in House District 36, Beaverton, Hillsborough, Washington County, and Education and Workforce Development are on our long list of legislative agenda priorities. So I am here to listen and take notes.
Next, we have Skip Newberry.
Skip Newberry, President and CEO of the Technology Association of Oregon and member of the board.
Next, we have Shauna Thies.
Hi, Shauna Tice, Technology Industry Consortium Strategist at the HEC.
And last on my list, I have Wendy Popkin.
Hello, I'm Wendy Popkin. I'm the Vice President of Sales for Explore Tualatin Valley. I serve on the board and I'm a member of the hospitality and tourism industry.
And if I missed anyone, please raise your hand. Go ahead, Andy.
Hi, this is Andy Friedman. I'm the Executive Director of United We Heal Training Trust and a member of the board.
I believe that's Aaron.
Thank you, everyone. So, Aliyah, I take it we do have quorum today.
We do have quorum, yes.
Excellent. And so today's agenda, we are looking forward to some governor's priorities around housing and behavioral health, and then presentation on Future Ready Oregon, and Todd will go over the strategic plan and scorecard. So do we have any public comment?
We do not have any public comment.
I'm told you might have some housekeeping items for us.
The only housekeeping items that I had were, Clay, would you mind pulling up that materials packet? You each should have gotten a materials packet today. And at the bottom were just a few housekeeping pieces of information that I wanted to share. If you wouldn't mind reading over that. And then last but not least, everyone should have received a per diem compensation qualification form. And if you are a member of the board, if you could please fill this out and return it to me before we leave today. Anyone in person will get this done today, and if you're online, I'll go ahead and get this from you later next week. Those are my housekeeping items.
Okay, thank you, Leah.
Thank you.
So we should move to the consent agenda. And so we have an action item to approve the December 13th, 2024 meeting minutes. So I'd like to request a motion to approve the meeting minutes.
So moved.
You have any seconds? Second. David, thank you, David. With that out of the way, we have I'm supposed to do, is anyone, all who approve, say yes? I'm gonna get this.
Yes.
Hi.
Aye.
Yes.
Anyone opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you. I will get there someday. So next we have governor's priorities in terms of housing production, and I think we have Andrew and Jade going first. Is that right?
Yep. You ready?
Yes, we are ready.
Okay, so yeah, we have a presentation. This was a joint project that we did a portion of, and then you'll hear from MBCB, Steve Johnson, who introduced himself earlier. There's a larger report. We're gonna kind of present to you some of our findings and recommendations from the executive summary. If you're interested in more, oh, you're gonna present it for me. Okay, great. Thank you. Please do refer to the larger report. So this is the Echo Northwest findings, and then after we're finished, I'll hand it over to Steve for his. So, okay, next slide. So just as a quick agenda of where we're going, as I'm sorry I didn't catch who just introduced us, but whoever that was just mentioned, Governor Kotek had established this goal for Oregon to produce 36,000 housing units for a year for the next 10 years. And part of that is ensuring that there's a workforce prepared to build those homes. And that's what really the focus of our study was, is how do we get that workforce ready for this? And so these are the agenda. Andrew's going to talk about the housing production workforce demand program inventory. I'm going to talk about the survey and the interviews that we did and the findings from those, and then focus on the recommendations. So for right now, I'll turn it to Andrew, and he'll tell you about this part.
Yeah, thank you, Jade. And so like Jade mentioned, this is just a very quick overview. There's a lot more detail in the report, and do encourage you to read it. We'd like to see this as sort of a foundational document to help the state think about how to improve existing training pathways and build new ones to meet, a goal, whether it's the governor's ambitious goal or something more ambitious or less ambitious. So next slide is a really just quick overview of the numbers for the industry. We call it the housing production industry, and we looked at a number of different industrial sectors, all of which are involved to some extent in the production of housing. Most important to the sector on the two bars on the left here, starting on the second bar, residential construction, the firms and businesses and individuals that actually build houses and arrange to have houses built, relying heavily on that really large bar, the specialty trade contractors, your electricians, your plumbers, your carpenters, that do a lot of the work, the specialty work. Also in this picture, for comparison purposes, we show remodelers. That's the third bar in. This is a group of employees employers and employees that we would not say are part of the sector, but do have skills that are potentially relevant and a potential, pool of workforce to help meet a goal of increasing production. Finally, in terms of what we, for comparison purposes, we're also showing the non-residential construction, building things other than houses and apartments. That's important, I think, for a couple of reasons that I'll get to in a second, but again, want to show it for comparison purposes. And then further to the right, other sectors that are involved pretty directly in the industry, but to a lesser degree in terms of numbers. Your manufactured home manufacturers, some activity in the state, but not a lot compared to the builders of homes themselves, architectural services and so on. In total, we'd assign about 100,000 workers to the sector right now. Most of those, a majority, are in the specialty trade contractors group. And we can't really tell because a lot of those specialty trade contractors are working on remodeling, on non-residential construction and so on. We don't have a way to separate that out. So we treat them as a whole there. Other piece in this chart, the little bars floating above the horizontal bars floating above the bars show you the average wages or compensation in each sector. And one thing I will point out, because there is a lot of competition, and we heard this from the engagement that Jade will describe, competition for the same workforce. And if you look at that non-residential construction, typical average compensation is much higher than the statewide average and much higher than what we see in the residential side. And we definitely heard that as a potential constraint on the workers available for residential construction. Okay, next slide. So we obviously, to understand what the state needs to do and how pathways need to expand, we looked very closely at, at the occupational distribution, and I'm not seeing a chart in there, but hopefully there is a chart.
I've got a slide here. If I can share my screen, maybe it'll show up. I don't know where that chart went.
Well, I'll keep talking. And so what we did is we looked at the most important occupations to the industry, whether they were the most important by number or played specific roles. And again, lots of detail in the report. What the chart would show you is this is a pretty concentrated industry. We have 3 or 4 occupations account for almost half of the residential construction industry. And if you expand that list to 15, you're at over 70% of residential construction and over half of the specialty trade contractors. So we can really focus on a fairly short list of occupations that are critical to the industry. I guess we can move on to the next slide. So I should add, we did a lot of work on the demographics of the workforce and looked at things like race and ethnicity, gender, age, compared that to the general population, to think about ways that the state could improve existing training programs to improve the accessibility of construction jobs to a broader population. Because, as I'll describe with this chart, to meet the stated goal, housing production goal, would require a really significant ramp up in terms of employment. What this chart's showing is in blue is historical housing starts over time, and then the past 2024, the Office of Economic Analysis projection of housing starts under status quo. The orange bars are a trajectory that gets to the Governor Kotek's stated goal in about 4 years and then stays there. And you can see that's a very strong increase over the current status quo. As many of you are aware, the industry itself is facing a lot of headwinds beyond just the labor force. You can see the last couple of years, housing starts have declined. Recent federal changes in terms of trade policy and immigration policy have potentially significant impacts on the industry, construction industry, and so on. But you can't build the houses without the workforce. So what would this scenario mean? By our calculations, meeting the goal would require an additional 12,700 workers each year in the industry from 2028 to 2034. That's a big increase. From 1 year to the next, it's not unprecedented for the sector historically, but we have never seen that sustained over periods of time. But what you can do with this scenario, if you say, I want a goal that's twice as ambitious or maybe only 50% of ambitious, you can take what I'm going to show you and divide the numbers by 2 or multiply the numbers by 2. So let's move to the next slide. Again, focusing on occupations, this slide takes that sort of scenario and breaks it out and spreads it across the occupations that are important to the industry. Carpenters, construction laborers, electricians, and so on. And what you're looking at in those little lollipops is the change in number of new positions that we would need to see every year for the next several years to meet the goal, relative to what we see in what OEED, the Employment Department, would project over the next 10 years under status quo. Some of these increases are pretty big. 20% increase in carpenter jobs every year for several years over what we would expect to see from normal churn and normal construction levels. And the increase varies by position, but you can definitely see there are a cluster that we would require a lot more of them. And they have to be trained somewhere, which is sort of the subject of the next couple of slides. which we've called our program inventory. And this was really our look at the training pathways into and through the industry. And we can move on to the next slide. So a couple of these, they're also very high level, but as we did with the labor force, we looked a lot at the demographics of, to the extent the data allowed, the demographics of people moving through post-secondary programs, the demographics of apprenticeships, comparing that to the incumbent workforce, to the population, again, with an eye to thinking about how these programs might be improved to increase the accessibility of jobs to a broader population, because as we just saw, the need to meet an ambitious goal is great. This particular slide is a map of, on the left, CTE programs, just the number of high schools with a construction-related CTE program. And big picture there is that these programs exist across the state. They're obviously concentrated in areas with more population, but we do see construction-related CTE across the state. We heard a lot from the engagement that one of the struggles that the industry has is attracting students, getting them excited about the construction trades, and high school is a great time to do that. So thinking about how to improve these programs even more to draw more people into the industry is critical, as an industry that relies less heavily on traditional post-secondary programs. And on the right, we had some apprenticeship data. We can move on here. So this chart shows community college programs. As I just mentioned, the industry relies heavily on a smallish number of occupations in the trades. Those trades rely heavily on apprenticeship programs, but to some extent also on community colleges. What this chart is just showing is a distribution of construction-related programs at the community college level. And again, not every community college is represented here, but most of the community colleges in the state, certainly the larger ones, are all represented here. And they're awarding credentials at a variety of levels. There are some occupations that require a 4-year degree, and we discussed those in the report, but the meat of the work, the training pathways really are in the sort of the high school to apprenticeship to industry, and to a lesser extent through the community colleges. And next slide here, and I will turn it back over to Jade.
Okay, thank you. So we also did a survey, and that's what I'll talk about here. We had a survey open for about 5 weeks, and we distributed it through our steering committee and then to a lot of different organizations that could reach out to employers. The main point of contact was employers of companies that hire any kind of construction workers. So you can see the variety that we reached here. And then we did the survey in English and in Spanish, and we also sent it out through the COVID agency that reaches all the COVID certified organizations. So we sent that one out too, and we marked it as such, so we knew when those came back. So who we got back, we got 38 back from the original survey. Some of those may have been COVID certified. We don't know because we didn't ask that in the original survey. But then when we sent it out through the COVID channel, 43 of those came back through that channel. So we know that those ones were COVID certified. 2 of them were returned to us through the Spanish, in the Spanish language, and the rest were returned in English. So that's sort of generally what we received back. Next slide. And sort of overall demographically, we received 80% of the responses were from non-union shops and 20% were from union signatory contractors. They came from all over the state. The majority came from Washington and Multnomah counties, but they were, there was a lot from everywhere else. Most of the respondents were top level at their organization. 70, about 3/4 had 25 or fewer employees. And then, they came from a wide range of types of contractors as well. So general contractors was the main one, but we also got other, and then, a variety of types of contracting types. And then we did lots of analysis on them. I'll get to some of the main points here. Go ahead to the next slide. Yeah. So one of the kind of the main findings was, are you having trouble attracting, hiring, and retaining workers? That was really what we wanted to find out in this survey. And 55% indicated that they agree or strongly agree with significant challenges with attracting, hiring, or retaining workers during the past year. So we know that there is a lot of people who are having this problem. Next slide. So asked, what's going on there? Some of the survey findings that show that the companies are struggling to fill a variety of both hourly and salaried positions, including carpenters, equipment operators, project managers, mechanics, foremen, you name it. There was a lot of different things that folks talked about in terms of the types of jobs. They cited work experience as one of the main issues of lacking advanced skills. And then the top retention challenges included, having too much competition from other industries, reliable transportation for workers to get to the job sites, and affordable housing. So getting workers to be able to live in the areas where they're needed was a real challenge. And so it's kind of like a catch-22 situation. We need to build housing for the workers to also live near the place where they need to work. Respondents cited employee referrals and apprenticeship programs as the most reliable source of skilled workers for their companies. And they talked about finding their best workers through those kind of informal networks and on-the-job training. And a lot of them talked about trying to actively diversify their workforce. And I think you'll hear a lot more about this when Steve talks, but they mentioned that it's harder to achieve gender diversity in their workforce than racial and ethnic diversity. And I think that's largely due to, the number of Hispanic Latino workers in this workforce. But we did talk to a few women, and many of them talked about how while there was some challenges, they were seeing positive changes in the industry and the sector. So, okay, next slide. Here's where I thought this was interesting. We asked in the survey about what they thought about the potential for reaching the governor's goal. Half of the respondents were skeptical that the state's housing production goal would be met. Another quarter were neutral. And, so that's a relatively low confidence level. We aren't quite sure about that. And I know that in conversations with Steve at MBCB, they had a sort of a different feeling about that from the firms that they were talking to. But, there's not only workforce issues, there are a lot of other dynamics and factors going on right now around governmental delays, development hurdles, all kinds of things. But yeah, so right now people aren't feeling terribly confident in this goal as one of our findings. Next slide. When we talk to people in focus groups and interviews, one of the sort of real crisis points that seemed to emerge was the building code professionals and the very high, seemingly high shortage of, and growing shortage of folks in that profession, and the numbers being graduating from programs being insufficient for the need. And that, as folks hire, they're often just poaching from each other as there's just not enough of them to go around. So there is the Oregon Building Officials Association trying right now to create an apprenticeship style program to create an alternative pathway. So that's something to look at. Obviously, one of the things that came up a lot in our conversations was strong differing opinions on apprenticeship ratios, with some people from the unions feeling very strongly that it needed to stay at a 1-to-1 for quality and safety. And then a lot of folks, especially in rural communities, feeling like it was a real barrier to their ability to grow and take on new employees if they had to maintain this 1-to-1 ratio. So we have a recommendation coming for that one in our recommendations. Yeah, go ahead. Is there a question? No, okay. Evolving career pathways, we saw a lot sort of changing. One of them was around career transitions, particularly as folks sort of age out, and I don't even mean that necessarily in an aging, but as the trades, because of their physical rigor, become harder and harder on a body, where do those folks go? And moving into building codes or superintendent roles or office roles were just nearly impossible because of the major decrease in wages. I think that was something that was folks were finding challenging. And so folks were just sort of pushing themselves into, you know, real kind of physical disability because of the need to maintain those wages. And so that was one of the things. And then just sort of the gaps in program offering. We had folks coming out of more technical programs, not having the needed skills in some of the office and management roles, but then folks coming out of the 4-year construction management programs, not knowing much about swinging a hammer. So folks kind of talking about the need to integrate a little bit more of the, like technical skills with Excel and other types of reading, oh gosh, now I'm losing the word, with the reading plans and other types of things with the actual technical skills of running the machinery and, and how those things could integrate better. Okay, I think I am, I have a hand. Craig.
Yeah, so on this set of findings, what was was there any question asked about safety concerns attached to these lack of skills? I can tell you as a manufacturing company owner, that eventually was one of the things that drove me away from hiring people, was that, the need to be able to keep them safe, trained, safe, and ultimately an employer responsible for safety to OSHA and the insurance company, no matter what. And I'm wondering if that is a big element of this. We'll take roofing contractors as a case in point. It's virtually impossible to hire people to do roofing and be in compliance with OSHA's protocols.
I mean, I think, yeah, there was a real need to do a lot of on-the-job training. And, this is true. People feel this is true no matter what they were coming from. And I mean, there's safety issues, and then there's just like, they need to learn how to do the job. And I think there was a frustration that no matter what program you come out of in school, you're going to come to the job site only knowing a portion of what you really need to know. And with rare exception of like where there's real, the schools and the industry are really working together on curriculum, which I did see a little bit. Those folks are finding a real synergy around getting those graduates right into the workplace with the exact right skills. Mostly though, there's a frustration, and not just around safety, although I'm sure that's a big one. Okay, I think I'm down to my last couple slides here. Yep. All right, so just a few recommendations. They're big, so there's more detail in the report. I just mentioned this, more collaboration among the training programs and the employers. When it gets done well, as we did see a few examples of, it can be really powerful. I think that's one area where industry can really rise to the occasion and share exactly what they are looking for in their field. So there are some existing models to improve training outcomes and address local workforce needs. I think down in Southern Oregon, there's some real, models to build off of there. Andrew talked about this earlier, early and ongoing development of a skilled diverse workforce, K through 12, pre-apprenticeship, apprenticeship programs, all of these kinds of ways of upskilling folks at every stage of their education is valuable. Next slide. Open more doors to the housing production work. There's licensing policies. We have heard talk, and I think Steve might get into this more, about a multi-skill construction license, reciprocity agreements with other states. to reduce barriers for out-of-state workers. These kinds of things can open the doors for more folks to be ready to start working faster. And then continue to link the efforts for the kinds of data that we collect. How do we make those integrate better so we can get a better sense of what's happening across agencies and across programs so that we have a clearer idea of what's going on. Okay. And then this one, you know, understandably, this one is contentious. The recommendation that we made was very limited in our approach, understanding that this is going to face a lot.
Apprentice ratio.
What's that? It's to limit it in specific areas for specific selected trades and over a sort of a piloted time period to kind of assess the changes of training capacity. That was what our recommendation was. So with that, that is our presentation. And if there's time for a few questions before I hand it over to Steve, I'm happy to take them. If not, we will happily hand that over.
Thank you, Andrew and Jade. I'm thinking maybe Steve can go next and then we can have a round of questions after that. If you're hanging around, Andrew and Jade.
We unfortunately have another meeting that we're supposed to run off to. So if possible, we would love to take any immediate questions now.
Okay. Any questions for Andrew and Jade? I don't see any. Thank you so much for your presentation.
Wait, Andy just raised his hand.
I have a question about the 1-to-1 ratio. How do you see that being useful?
Well, it's changing the 1-to-1 ratio. Right now, there is the 1-to-1 ratio. So this would allow it to be a 2-to-1 ratio. So a lot of the folks in some of the areas felt that that was very restrictive. And if they could just have one more apprentice under their journey person, that would allow them to train up 2 folks and get more labor in and not, they struggled to even find one journey person to match their one apprentice. So this would give them the opportunity to get 2 apprentices going under one journey person.
I see. And so you recognize this has to go through BOLI though, right?
Well, yes. I mean, this is just a recommendation. And yeah, having had many conversations with a lot of folks on both sides of this, we knew that even putting it in here would be, yeah, like this is the beginning of, I'm sure, much more conversation, but that's what we heard from a lot of folks, that this was really a hurdle for them.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jade.
Thanks, everyone.
Steve, you're up next.
Good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today and to present the insights from our report. As we engage in this discussion, I want to emphasize that this initiative is an opportunity for growth, collaboration, and long-term impact on Oregon's workforce. The work we're presenting today is not just another study, it's the beginning of a 10-year initiative that has the potential to transform how we develop, support, and integrate minority workforce into a broader workforce system. Our focus is to define a framework that ensures equal access to opportunity for all. To do this, we must look at the workforce development through a bifocal lens, one that balances business-first principles with a clearly defined DEIA framework. The business-first lens. Businesses look to create a competitive advantage to attract the best talent, to deliver the best products and services on time, safely, at a profit, while positively impacting the communities in which their workers live and work. The DEIA lens resides in the attract the best talent. Within this business framework, we must define equal access to opportunity through 3 key pillars. Equal access to career opportunities for both individual workers and small businesses, including prime and subcontractors. Equal access to education and training to both individual workers and small business, to ensure people have the skills and knowledge to move up the career pathway. And 3, equal access to authentic relationships that aren't transactional. Because business happens through trust, relationship, and networks that are not purely transactional. This approach ensures that we're not talking about diversity for the sake of diversity, but structuring workforce development in a way that is sustainable, data-driven, and market-aligned. One of the biggest challenges in DEIA conversation is the lack of consensus on what success looks like. That's why this report is crucial. It provides a structured, experience-driven approach that considers real-life experiences of minority workers, prime contractors, and subcontractors in the field. We're not just analyzing numbers, we're hearing directly from those on the ground, the people navigating the system. As we move forward today, our goal is to frame this as a conversation around solutions, not obstacles. Dean will walk us through the key findings of our report, and we welcome any open discussion on how we can work together to align workforce development policy with industry needs and an equitable access. So from there, I'll turn it over to Dina.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. I don't know who's doing the slides, so thank you for navigating, and I'll just let you know when to go through them to move on. So as Steve had just told you, when we did our report, we worked through an equity lens, and the equity lens he was making clear, you know, a lot of people think about DEI when they think about looking at underserved and underrepresented groups. And that we wanted to make certain that it was clear that not only are we looking at like what the problems are, but it's a very solution-focused lens that we're on. So we worked up to evaluate the workforce demographics as our part of this report, which does focus on underserved and underrepresented populations. Assess the needs, promoted these equity-centered solutions that we mined out of the conversations that we had. And the data was qualitative data that was collected via interviews, and we'll go into who we interviewed or the types of interviews we had, and also through focus groups. We did do secondary research as well in order to look at that secondary research vis-a-vis the interviews that we had recorded. And then we came up with recommendations, which also focused on policy and investment decisions that could be considered. That came out of all of our analysis, quantitative, the secondary analysis and the qualitative analysis. Okay, we could go on, please. Okay, so I just went through the research methodologies. So this is a little bit redundant. We could go to the next slide. I'm used to steering. Okay, so there were some themes that emerged, and this slide goes through the large broad strokes of the themes. So labor shortages, all interviewees and focus groups were concerned that this is real. And as I'll even jump ahead and say, as we heard from Jade, most of the people that we spoke to as well were very skeptical about how achievable the goal was given the shortages. But we're going to remain hopeful that we could work through some of these issues through our recommendations. Geographic workforce disparities was a theme. Obviously, there's more of a concentration of labor in urban areas, and the more rural you get, the more challenging it was. There was definite emerging themes through with all groups across the different interviews that we had, which represented different groups of systemic inequities. Minority-owned businesses did we had an interview with trades organization heads that felt minority-owned businesses were repeatedly telling them that they were struggling to compete, and even in our subcontractor group, the same was echoed. There are retention challenges for many reasons, and we could get into that. Lack of structured career advancement. This, I think Jade and her group had touched on a bit, where the career ladders are still not very clear for individuals. Technology adoption gap, especially now as we move into, a big change. There's a seismic change in technology and how it's impacting the industry and other industries as well that are adjacent. And the sentiment was that policies were there, but they weren't being enforced enough. So it wasn't helping underserved and underrepresented groups in the way that they were hoping they would. And then, as we know, there's definitely been challenges around helping underserved and underrepresented populations find equity within this sector and other sectors. We can move on, please. Okay, another thing that came up was, if we think about residential housing, a lot of times we'll think about, any man on the street will think about, okay, getting my house renovated or building a new house. And a lot of times these are private people who will hire the construction force. And for that reason, residential contractors often have a lot of variance in how they put together their crew. Once we talk about government subsidized, as you know, initiatives in residential housing, it feels, especially to minority contractors, a lot more like commercial housing and commercial construction in general. And this creates more barriers because of, as a lot of the underrepresented groups, especially those who want to start their own businesses, they don't have, they express they don't have the same access to resources they feel as more established groups, which tend to be reflective of the dominant groups in society. There is a huge proportion of the residential housing sector that do come from like Hispanic populations. And unfortunately, a lot of these trades workers do not have the certifications that are given out through the unions, and they consider themselves multi-trade. And they've been working for many years, yet there are barriers to them becoming licensed and getting the same education and certifications that a carpenter or a plumber or an electrician would get, despite their experience. And then, as we can imagine, there's definitely a lot of these same construction crews that have immigration workers. And we know that this is an issue right now for verification and for participation. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, Paris is going to talk a little bit about these are the groups that we've interviewed, one person per sector, and what this slide represents.
Thank you.
Paris? Sure.
Yes, so this table, it's a lot of fields, but this is just for the individual interviews. So each row represents one interview participant, and we labeled them by letters so that would be easier to follow along throughout the report and review and refer to this key. Because many times when we look at any data set that is collected from people specifically, we tend to have one idea in our head of sort of the type of person that would be giving that data, would be answering the questions in the interview if you're not right there in the interview. So this is just a concise way to help the reader understand where each participant is coming from a little bit more in depth in the perspectives as they share their wisdom and insights and experiences. I want to specifically note briefly for the stakeholders that these participants represent different types of stakeholders. So some of them, it's not just employees. Some of them represent entire businesses that they work with or consult with, or that do things through their company. And people in the education sector, it's students. They speak for the students, and everyone that we interviewed had a very deep understanding of their pool of stakeholders, which created a lot of really original, authentic insights. All right, go to the next slide.
Okay, so along those lines, we did focus on leaders for interviews, and of the total stakeholders from the previous slide, we just want to give you some insight into the amount of stakeholders that they had collectively stated they represented and the voices that they've heard over the past few years, most recently. So because I know as a qualitative work, sometimes you think, oh, well, you did 10 interviews and met with these 10 people, but it's important to understand where the voices are coming from. Okay, if we can move on, please. So we did get some key insights that participants emphasized, and these are insights that we've heard in other reports. I think you'll recognize them throughout the past 5-6 years in construction reports. Mentorship and networking are vital. And people want to be mentored with people that look like them, that they feel comfortable around. Structural inequities do exist as per the interviews that we had and the focus groups. And these inequities are obstacles for businesses and for workers. There are workforce development programs, but we consistently heard throughout the interviews and focus group that they weren't adequate in addressing long-term career pathways. They still lacked in ladder building. And there was also skills building gaps for underrepresented groups. Some of these did have to do with like regional scarcity of the programming or even slots access. Language, it's funny because a lot of times we hear language barrier. That didn't come up as much. While some participants acknowledged that there are DEI initiatives going on in Oregon focused on their cohort, they did feel that a lot of this was more lip service and very superficial, and that they didn't have the outcomes that they were really hoping for. And we're just going to report, as Jade was saying at the end, we're just reporting what we heard. So some of this is a little bit painful to hear, and it's important because this was the mandate to hear those authentic voices. And a huge barrier for a lot of the businesses that we spoke to and the leaders that represented businesses said there are financial barriers, that a lot of times they don't even want to seek government contracts because they know they're going to have to put so much money up front out, and they just don't have the initial outlay and payments, because payments are delayed because of the bureaucracy of it, you know. So this becomes a large challenge. Next slide, please. Okay, so the focus groups, we had 2 focus groups. We were challenged to get people to speak in this. There were two reasons. One was a lot of people are paying people to do focus groups now, and a lot of the groups and individuals that we were looking to meet with, they were challenged financially. So they like, I don't have time unless I get paid. And then it's also a matter of speaking authentically about topics that are difficult to speak about. So we did have a general contractor group, and this was really helpful to leaders within the community representing minority-owned large general contractor companies. And it was important for us to hear these voices because they come from a certain perspective. And in many ways, their perspective aligns very similarly. NBCB's been doing this work for several years in Oregon, and just general contractors in general, regardless of if they serve underrepresented groups or are made up of underrepresented groups or led by minority-owned businesses. There seems to be consistency in some of these themes. Reform of PLAs and other government policies to ensure equitable access for minority contractors. It's a challenge. It's a challenge to meet that mandate. So this is one of the things that'll keep people from wanting to participate in government initiatives like this. I did skip by once, I'm sorry. Both participants emphasized the need for direct funding and resources to support businesses with a proven track record in workforce training and development. So what this looks like is There are minority business owners, large general contractors, and even subcontractors echo this, where they're hiring underrepresented populations, members from underrepresented groups. They're working in underserved communities, giving employment to people in underserved communities. They're spending their own time training them on the job and their own financial investment. And they're not getting an ROI because a lot of times then if there's a COVID initiative, another large contractor will hire out from under these contractors, the employees that they invested a lot of time training. So there was recommendations to maybe make that more formal, that whole training process, where if we can recruit from underrepresented groups and help source through in underserved communities to help people find employment, meaningful, gainful employment in construction. Is there a way we can be incentivized for that? Workforce development programs, invest in programs that create career ladders. And I know that some of this is being done. A lot of this is, if we think about like the multi-trade, maybe first generation immigrant who's here with permanency, still speaking Spanish, learned through family members how to do the job, and doesn't have that formal entry and access. They're feeling a little bit stuck on how to develop career ladders without additional hurdle help. Innovate around mentorship and training programs. So this is like, if you think about, if you could see her, you could be her. They did in the STEM programming where they were trying to get girls more interested in STEM. Similarly, in the construction industry, there's a repeat from different people we spoke to. We'd love to hear more voices that sound like us and see more people that we feel connected to that are encouraging us to participate in this industry, training us, mentoring us. Improve DEI accountability, move beyond, again, superficial diversity metrics. There seem to be a lot of a sense of, with like COVID initiatives, for example, that it becomes almost a game. You know, there are certain people that are really good at doing this work. So the same general contractors will hire the same people and it'll be a small group and they're doing really well. But there's all these other people that wish they could participate and just don't even know how to make entry. And again, to incentivize and do additional outreach. Of course, we're always hearing over and over again how important the pipeline starts in kindergarten. We need to get into the schools and do more in the schools. Okay, next slide, please. So subcontractor focus. This group was a couple of smaller minority-owned businesses, woman minority-owned, and also woman and person of color, and also a male. And it was interesting because one of the subcontractors was saying, I do well. I've been doing this for many, many years, and everybody knows me. So when there's these contracts that have a COVID incentive, right away people think to call me, which almost proved the point of this is you really need to find a way to network in this sector. And how can we help people network and get known and develop that credentialing? Suggested the general contractors provide clearer feedback and bid performance. This is another thing. If minority subcontractors in this group was saying, if we get hired on the job, right? Sometimes we'll get hired, but then we don't make it through the whole job. And they feel like a diversity hire and they feel like they're just getting hired enough so that way they could cross their T's and dot their I's on paper. But then they have the variance to say, well, they're just not cutting it. So we're going to move on to the typical people that we work with. So holding people accountable was a theme. And even in the interviews, we heard that a lot. Holding people more accountable and having more accountability to the diversity initiatives would be helpful to them. Training, again, you could see these are similar themes: training programs, incentives, standardizing requirements across government contracts to reduce administrative burden. This was something that came up, like when we think about, BOLI, and we think about certain requirements that are out there, and they're logical and they make sense. And they're very difficult for some smaller contractors to hit. So thinking about, and also if you think about like first generation workers who are still struggling to understand the system, there's a need for them to get more hurdle help in being able to meet these requirements, even filling out applications. So this is something that I'm sure you've heard before is a barrier. And then also learning the business side, right? Workshops that teach bidding strategies and project management, advocacy to simplify the compliance process and reduce insurance and bonding costs for small businesses, or work with them to help give them maybe small grants, micro grants, or some other way to get bonded more quickly. Ways to give them hurdle help around, okay, if you're not going to get paid for a certain amount of time, but you need to start the work, maybe we could give you a grant, or we could give you a micro loan in order to get you started. So that way it doesn't become a burden. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so we'll look, there was so much information. We had these conversations, we had very long conversations, a lot of stories. So analyzing the data, there was so many different ideas thrown out there, and there is so much potential among people who are not currently participating. So the groups that we talked to represented women, which, as you've heard from Eco Northwest, there's huge, that they were like the biggest portion of what we consider underrepresented groups that are not participating, right? Because if you look at other groups, so if you look at the white population, an equitable, this pretty much the same proportion of how many people represent the white population in Oregon represent within the construction industry. Similarly for Hispanic and the Black population. But women that make up 51%, they had a very, very small percentage, you know, in the single digits. So right away you think, well, that's a great grab, let's go after women. And there's also a huge culture shift that you have to think about, because women aren't participating. It's a much heavier lift. So it's something that we need to do. And we were thinking that for the groups that aren't participating right now, really work on the schools programs, focusing in years 1 through 3 on trying to target these groups in schools early on, 3rd grade, 4th grade, PR campaigns. How can we get them engaged, thinking, hey, this is a potential future opportunity for me? And more so, how to get their parents engaged and believing that this is a really valid career path for my child, because there was such a heavy push for STEM. And it wasn't top of mind for so many people. So concurrently focus on the demographics that already have the knowledge, skills, and tools in the residential construction sector. And as we heard, Hispanic population is heavily participating in residential construction. So how can we better leverage this population and grow this population? Mental health. There was talk in the subcontractor focus group about hidden disabilities, you know, whether it be ADHD or autism or Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis. People don't want to speak about these mental health or physical disabilities, and nobody addresses them. So there's a huge opportunity. Like we talk about, well, what about veterans? A lot of veterans have these hidden disabilities. So being more focused on how can we help people participate who may have special needs on the construction site, but still be able to do the job just fine. Partnering with the contractors, the minorities, represented contractors and subcontractors through, as we said previously, these incentivizing them, creating no programs. One thing that we came up and we put in the recommendations is the trades organizations that are out there, like NAMAC and Latino Built and Oregon Tradeswomen. We are, you know, they're given grants, they're encouraged to do work, to lean in more heavily on helping these organizations participate in some certification of people from underrepresented groups. And they're able to move within the underserved communities as well and pull out potential workforce. And think about maybe a multi-trade certification that could then be offered through these trades organizations and partner with the skilled trades to create crews, housing crews that have skilled tradesmen and then these multi-tradesmen that work with them and under their supervision, so that way more work could get done more quickly. And then we can legitimize and start to create ladders, base ladders for people who prior didn't feel that they had opportunity to get certified. And repeatedly we heard, don't focus on COVID right now. You know, let's think outside the box. Let's start being creative. This initiative starts now. We have to start thinking now about new and innovative ways instead of going backwards and trying to rework the challenges that we're having. Next slide, please. So I'm gonna go a little bit quickly because I know I'm conscious of time, and I was going to, let me just catch up here. Okay. So I spoke, we could actually pass through this. This is talking a little bit about the mental health and partnering, union and non-union partnering. This is where we start talking about how to think about union and the trades organizations that represent the groups that we're really, when we think about diversity and inclusion, that we're trying to mine. We did hear about the PLA waivers being a barrier and being a challenge, and that's something I think is you're probably hearing across all the industries. Assessment programs where workers can demonstrate competencies directly. So like be getting credit for the work experience that they have and on the job work. And the alternative pathways is really in collaboration with the BOLI certifications, creating these multi-trade pathways. Community-based workforce development, partner with to create with these trades organizations, create tailored training programs for immigrant workers. We think this is an opportunity potentially. I mean, it would be, there'd have to be a lot of policy development, but we talk about how can we get people pathways to the US and citizenship. And if we talk about like HB1 visas, then we think about what about the opportunity to give people who have this experience residency, even if it's temporary residency, to do this work on a visa. Government support for small businesses, simplify the process, provide help, offer workshops. Again, these trade organizations that represent and look like the groups we're trying to get to build up more capacity from would be ideal for helping to do this type of training. Next, please. Hybrid workforce models. So everything we're saying is basically partnership, creating these types of partnership. Next, please. We did put in the report some examples of programs that we found that are innovative and also shore up the types of recommendations that we made throughout the report. The report's quite dense, so I'm not going to go into these details now, but we did try to offer, we even put in some mock programs with mock budgets to give an example of, what would it really cost to do things a little bit differently or think about some demonstration projects that you could pilot. Next, please. And sorry, can you go back one, please? Okay. Oh no, one more forward. There we go. Okay. This was a theme, there's this disconnect between what the practice are and the expectations. So when it came to the recommendations, these were the main themes around the recommendations: creating these transitional credentialing programs, facilitating multi-trade business models, introduce state-supported work authorization pathways with sponsorship, streamline E-Verify compliance for small businesses, pilot a multi-trade inspector program, and develop flexible reporting mechanisms. Next, please. Okay, this just goes into a little bit more detail. Next. Okay, so overall, yes, there was a lot of expression from people in the interviews focus group that this initiative seems maybe overly ambitious. And it was challenging. I think Steve has a lot of clout in the community, just to put it bluntly, and he is able to gain a lot of trust in the communities that we're looking to develop. And at first, people did not really want to participate. And when they started participating in the interviews and hearing about the fact that we really did want to authentically hear their views and their innovations and their suggestions, there was hope. And I think that's where sometimes the hope fades, when voices don't feel heard and trust breaks. So I think overall, as long as we can maintain trust, we can listen, we could think outside the box, we could work differently, and together. I think there is a lot of opportunity over the next 10 years, and we're very excited. Thank you.
So to wrap up real quick, this is a lot of information, a lot of complexity, because you're having to look at both how you impact the construction companies, because they're the ones that are doing the recruiting and the training. So you have to look at their gaps to fill those, and then you also look at the gaps of filling the workers, and then the pipeline. So there's a lot of things that you're looking at, but if you go back to the equity lens, the DEI lens that we outlined, and if you apply that to all the companies, all the education sectors, if you just put everyone through that filter, then you'll be able to start to close the gaps, and then make sure that the resources that are allocated to the organizations that have the highest reach and engagement with your priority population, and then the ones that are doing the best work. That's how we're going to grow the workforce quicker and get to our own that vision of having an equitable workforce.
Todd has a question, Steve.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate it, Dina. I just wanted to say thank you to all you, Steve, Dina, Paris, and Andrew and Jade, for all this great work. It's fantastic. I'm looking forward to having the chance to dig into the reports more and take a deeper dive and learn from that. As you can imagine, we're hearing a lot back here in DC about the housing and construction issues in many of the states across the country. So clearly, and obviously, we're not alone. But listening to all this made me think about, in particular, Dina, your presentation, thank you so much, overlap with some of the great work that's happening at local workforce boards as it relates to Prosperity 10,000. As many of you know, as board members, we do have a role in terms of supporting and ensuring that the local boards reach their goals in Prosperity 10,000. So I think it was last week, end of the week, Thursday or Friday, that Kim Parker Jarenas testified at the legislature on P10K. I don't know, Kim, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I thought you might want to say a few words that might connect to this work. Hey, Kim, if you're there, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Yep.
Oh, no,
Sorry. Thank you, Todd. I was just saying to myself, I want to echo the comments about the fantastic work. Really interesting, and unfortunately confirming also some assumptions that many of us have made. So yes, the Oregon Workforce Partnership and with Representative Daniel Wynn have introduced House Bill 3669, which is a continuation of funding for Prosperity 10,000, which was a portion of the Future Ready Oregon bill that was passed several years ago that we are all familiar with. And during my testimony, we're asking for $50 million, which we recognize is quite a bit. That's the same amount that we asked for last time. We got 35 million in Future Ready Oregon. And the goal was to serve 10,000 people with the 50 million. We're still shooting for that, despite the fact that we didn't get the full 50 million. And just for some quick data points, we have served to date over 6,100 participants across the state, and are projected to get to about 8,500. We're still hoping to actually reach the 10,000 because that is the goal despite the funding. And of those, we had very specific and targeted goals to serve women and other priority populations most negatively impacted by the pandemic, and get those folks jobs that are paying more than $17 an hour. The average wage is over $21, and 89% of those that we have served are making at least $17 an hour. Of all of those that we have served, the goal is 75% are receiving employment. We are right at that goal mark. And 85% of the individuals that we are serving are completing. So I will spare you a lot of other data, and if there's a desire for the board to hear a more in-depth report at some point in the future, I'd be happy to do so. But happy to just sort of follow up with the reports that we've heard specifically about housing. This funding at the local workforce boards as part of Prosperity 10,000 was not limited to the three consortia sectors that the rest of Future Ready were required. So many of the local workforce boards have been able to invest these dollars in construction training.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions for Steve, Dina, or Paris? Okay, we are running a little bit late, so let's go ahead with
I had a question.
Yes, go ahead.
I'm looking over the list of surveyed of interviews. I don't see a lot of workers or union apprenticeship training programs or union trades folks. I'm wondering, am I missing something? Did any of them get interviewed? What happened there?
So, one, the time of the year the study was done over the holidays was difficult to get a hold of people. We did reach out to the unions multiple times, but we did not hear back from them.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, we have another question from Wendy.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a quick comment, and I centered on that certifications and the ability for small businesses to navigate apprenticeships, and to say that the tourism and hospitality industry also struggles, as you know, with getting enough workers, and aim for some of the same demographics and offer opportunities. The reason I mention it is because now we do have nationally registered apprenticeships that are approved by DOL that are certification based and not hours based. And we found that to be very helpful in terms of getting people through the program, to the comment that giving, credit for experience. And it's also administered through the national our national trade organizations. And so it takes a lot of onus off of the individual business owners. And I know that when I was first exploring the workforce system, and Kim was a big help in that, as was Heather and others, I was told that one of the big barriers for smaller businesses is the administration of those programs. So I'm just wondering, in the mix, and I just offer that for comment, that it seems that might bear into some of the findings of this, what our industry has tried to remove in terms of barriers for apprenticeships.
So, I mean, a lot of the apprenticeship programs regionally there's limited slots. They're not available. There's trust issues with attending the apprenticeship programs. There are some language barriers. There are cultural barriers. A lot of the businesses don't feel the same sense of partnership. I mean, there's a very different culture in the construction industry. I know that even for women, that was a big issue, is a lot of women, things might be getting a little bit better, but that's starting from a place of where women are feeling hugely threatened and unsafe in these work environments. So that's why there was the sense of, we'd like to get more training from our trades groups that represent us, that we trust and we feel comfortable with, and we feel can understand us, and then allow us to that entry point to then work up to these skilled trades certifications.
Thank you, Steve, Dina, and Paris, for sharing all the insights from your books group. We are running a little bit behind, so I'm going to ask Jennifer to go next, and we might cut down our break by 5 minutes. So give us a chance to catch up.
I'll talk fast.
Do you need this?
Do I need the microphone? I don't know if folks online can hear or. Okay. I will use the one. All right. I'm going to do this, so that I don't have to hold it. Does that work, or do I need it closer? Okay, super. Well, thank you for inviting me to be with you today. I actually had hoped that our new healthcare industry consortium strategist, Maggie Forey, could present this information, but she is on a well-deserved vacation right now. So You get me. So for those of you who haven't met Jennifer Purcell, I'm the Director for Future Ready Oregon at the Higher Education Coordinating Commission, and I was invited today to share some updates on the work of the Healthcare Industry Consortium and the recent Behavioral Health Talent Assessment. Next slide, please. Great. So I think most of you are familiar with the industry consortia that were established through Future Ready Oregon. They are serving as a model for a shared leadership approach, informing policy and program development and building on the ecosystem alignment and advancing strategies that address sector-specific workforce needs. In 2023, the HEC convened 3 industry consortia representing healthcare, manufacturing, and technology sectors. And Nick Rectemont, who can wave, is our new manufacturing consortium strategist. And I believe Shauna Tice, our technology strategist, is joining online. As the convener of the industry consortia, the HEC is really leveraging these partnerships to inform our sector-specific workforce and talent development expertise. And the consortia are really helping us to better understand workforce supply and demand and providing us a space where we can really integrate supply and demand data in Oregon. They're leveraging statewide sector strategies, advancing promising practices, and identifying replicable and scalable strategies. I'm gonna rapid fire through some of these because I know we're short on time. So next slide. The industry consortia are part of an integrated workforce and talent development ecosystem. At the state level, of course, the board advises the governor, state agencies, and local workforce development boards on statewide workforce development issues and priorities. And the statewide industry consortia, as I mentioned, are informing the HEC and the board's sector-specific expertise to address industries and occupations that are experiencing critical workforce shortages. And then local partnerships are convened to collaborate and co-create strategies to address regional workforce needs. The Workforce and Talent Development Board, the industry consortia, and the local sector partnerships convened by the 9 local workforce boards are designed to learn from and advise one another, and it's this structure that centers equity, innovation, and partnership, and elevates the importance of addressing both statewide and locally determined critical workforce shortages and strategic workforce opportunities. Next slide, please. So the Healthcare Industry Consortium in particular, and this is in your packets, it's hard to read up there, launched in April of 2023 and serves as a new statewide collaborative and leadership forum. Its leadership includes WTDB member Dr. Adrian Bennings, and its membership includes 32 diverse representatives across industry, community, education, and labor, and includes WTDB members Kathy Reynolds and Jana Benton. In the first 2 years, the consortium has established its membership, building a table for shared leadership and the engagement of diverse perspectives, with the goal of identifying and developing strategies to address Oregon's most pressing healthcare workforce needs. Members have been building shared knowledge for data-driven decision-making and ideation, including presentations from partners and agencies with foundational information, as well as from panels of Future Ready Oregon grantees and regional partners who are sharing promising practices and successful recruitment, retention, and advancement strategies that are addressing equitable access and success in education and employment. The consortium has completed 2 projects to inform decision-making, including a series of employer focus groups, which I believe you had a presentation on at your last meeting, and then the recent Behavioral Health Talent Assessment, which I'll share highlights from today. Next slide, please. But before I do that, I just want to highlight the Healthcare Consortium's priorities for 2025. These include nursing demand planning, the behavioral health workforce, intentional employer engagement, and continued learning from Future Ready Oregon. In 2025, work groups will be convened to explore and develop wage and occupation profiles and career and credential pathway maps for high demand occupations, specifically in nursing and behavioral health. Additionally, the nursing demand planning work group will be considering the entire nursing career pathway and exploring best practices and cross-sector investment models. The behavioral health workforce work group will be preparing an action plan to advance the recommendations from the behavioral health talent assessment, which you'll hear more about now. Next slide, please. So let's dive in. The behavioral health talent assessment and the corresponding career pathways map were developed for the HEC by Advocates for Human Potential, or AHP. They're presented at the Healthcare Industry Consortium's Q1 meeting in January and published later that month, and are available on our website. And I believe there are links provided to board members to both of those full documents. The new report identifies pathways for Oregonians to behavioral health careers and evaluates barriers and opportunities for recruiting, training, and retaining a diverse behavioral health workforce. The HEC set out to understand behavioral health workforce needs with the objectives of informing program options that prioritize critical shortage occupations and growing and diversifying the supply and distribution of the behavioral health workforce in Oregon. The assessment is also intended to project future workforce demand, as well as the demand for education and training programs across Oregon. AHP was selected as the successful proposer and began their work in September of 2024. They provided an assessment with 3 components. First, they reviewed and developed a summary of existing behavioral health workforce supply and demand reports and analyses. So this was important to serve as a baseline and to inform how best to appropriate resources, focus, and further assessment throughout the project, ensuring that the talent assessment addressed gaps and built upon existing knowledge. Next, in collaboration with the HEC and the steering committee, AHP set out to provide a characterization of Oregon's behavioral health talent pipeline, disaggregated by race, ethnicity, gender, age, geography, educational attainment, and employment. And this work involved a series of 2 focus groups, 14 key informant interviews, and a survey of behavioral health professionals across Oregon. The interviews included meeting with educators, practitioners, administrators, and leaders in the field. And focus groups were dedicated to speaking with educators across a variety of settings and administrative authorities. Research findings informed analyses of current demand, as well as shortages and projected demand, as well as looking at high-value credentialing and pathways for behavioral health careers and mapping those career opportunities. The review of the state's behavioral health workforce landscape provided evidence and direction and really helped to raise awareness around the key challenges. The intent is that this work will be used to inform future planning for post-secondary behavioral health education and training programs, and to grow and expand the workforce in Oregon. Let's see, the behavioral health talent assessment includes a comprehensive overview of the skills landscape within the industry, an illustration of the pathways through which qualified students enter and exit the behavioral health workforce, and a foundation for identifying effective programs and potential partnerships between educators, community-based organizations, and employers. AHP really focused on primary data collection that was supplemented by literature review and secondary data sources. And the analysis and interpretation of the data was conducted with input and feedback from HEC staff, and as I mentioned, an enthusiastic and engaged steering committee that included 18 professionals providing diverse perspectives across Oregon. The steering committee openly shared their expertise and insight and provided Oregon that AHP needed to develop a strong set of recommendations, as well as to provide and identify areas for further research. And lastly, the talent assessment includes an inventory of post-secondary behavioral health education and training offerings, including workforce service providers, training organizations, community colleges, and then public and private universities. The findings and recommendations include a broad programming gap analysis that details what is available in Oregon, where expansion is likely needed, and where current levels of programming are sufficient. Next slide, please. This project was meant to provide a baseline for Oregon in terms of addressing some of the challenges outlined in AHP's work, including the identification of gaps and then leveraging those things that are working well in Oregon. It's intended that there will be a need for a deeper dive into much of the issues that AHP identified, and they have recommended some additional focus areas for research. The questions that AHP provided context around are: how can Oregon improve the return on investment in behavioral health, both for employers, practitioners, and the folks that are being served in communities? And then also to consider, how can Oregon best offer a range of opportunities, access, and support for folks to pursue careers in behavioral health? AHP was intentional to note that with all of the findings, recommendations, and analyses, it's important to emphasize that in Oregon, there's a need to address wages for behavioral health workforce for any strategies to truly be successful in expanding and diversifying the behavioral health workforce in Oregon. They've emphasized that we cannot address just one piece of the puzzle, and it will require a multi-pronged approach, working together in addition to addressing wages for any of these recommendations to be successful. Persistent shortages consistently reflect challenges around low pay, lack of cultural responsiveness, educational constraints, and clear pathways and workforce pressures that are impacting retention. Some of the challenges that AHP heard from educators, and I think my pages are out of order. One moment, please. This is what happens when I move too fast. All right. Okay. Well, I will highlight here today the high-level findings and recommendations. There is significantly more detail available in the report, including quotes from research participants. Some of the challenges that AHP heard from educators and other folks working in the field were a lack of opportunities to meet the demand of the upcoming workforce. So this is both shortage areas and projections for future demand. Of course, the cost of education is not just a challenge in Oregon, but all over the country. And one of the benefits of working with AHP is that they have significant experience considering the challenges and opportunities around the behavioral health workforce across the country. And they were able to draw some comparisons, particularly in the field of behavioral health, comparing the cost of education to the pay potential when working in the field can be particularly challenging. Additionally, licensure and training barriers are considered cost prohibitive, perhaps not enough supervisors or clinical supervision is available to help folks enter into the field and thrive in the field as well. This is compounded when folks are leaving the behavioral health field for other positions as a result of workplace challenges, burnout, workplace dynamics, seeking employment in other health-related fields, and not enough folks with the longevity in their roles needed to be able to train new workforce participants. AHP identified challenges related to burnout and trauma and low pay and limited advancement opportunities as impacting retention, as well as an increasing shift to private practice. So people are leaving after a few years to earn higher pay, work with less acute clients and less clients in general. And this is compounding the challenges presented by an emerging workforce with different types of workplace norms and concerns. And these are all impacted by and impact the structural, social, and systemic challenges that Oregon and other states are really feeling acutely, particularly related to regulations, prescriptive care mandates, high administrative burdens, and general increases in cost of living. So it's really a multi-layered challenge. I mentioned that AHP's work included a survey of behavioral health professionals. The main goal of that survey was to examine the extent to which behavioral health related majors differ from other majors at public universities and both graduate and bachelor's degree programs, and also at the associate's level. Interestingly, their findings indicate that behavioral health majors are less likely to graduate. One of the findings AHP highlighted was effective and affordable pipelines to behavioral health position through community college into bachelor's programs and into the workforce. However, compared to the national levels, the average completion rates for both bachelor's programs and community colleges were well below national averages for the last couple of years. And in 2023 in particular, they were almost half. That by itself could be a significant part of the issue in terms of the pipeline. And regardless of the other recommendations and approaches, AHP's findings indicate that if that doesn't show improvement, it's going to be challenging to move the needle on shortages in the behavioral health workforce. And one of their recommendations is additional research to really better understand what is impacting graduation rates. Secondly, the survey indicated that burnout and retention is prevalent in the Oregon behavioral health workforce. Approximately 3 to 4% of all of the behavioral health workforce in Oregon participated in AHP's survey. They indicated that this level of participation is rare, and it allowed them to really increase their confidence in the statistical generalities of the findings. One of the first pieces they found that was interesting is that a significant amount of folks intend to quit their job in the current month. So in the next 30 days, the findings varied significantly by age, with 61% of 30 to 39-year-olds indicating that they intend to leave their job in the behavioral health field in the next month, followed by 18 to 29-year-olds at 44%. AHP emphasized that a big part of why folks like their jobs in the behavioral health field and why they choose the behavioral health field is values-based, expressing a desire to help people. However, AHP indicates that burnout rates are abnormally high compared to other parts of the country, both in terms of the averages for those intending to quit and within the age groups themselves in particular. AHP also evaluated how experiences along the education continuum predict whether someone will actually be a behavioral health workforce professional in Oregon, and whether or not they will actually, at this point in their career, how likely they are to quit or leave the industry or their job. AHP that found that having a family member or close family friend that is in the behavioral health field is There is a I want to make sure I say this right, a 1,200% increase in the odds that they will pursue the behavioral health field. So you are 12 times more likely to pursue a job in the behavioral health field if you have a family member or a close family friend that is in the field. Additionally, AHP's data suggests that folks who wait to choose their major later in their college career are more likely to choose behavioral health. Therefore, it's likely that behavioral health is being chosen because students either didn't get into their other program of choice, it's a choice of last resort, or they discover the opportunity later in their journey. And while we might be inclined to consider this a good thing, AHP's analysis further indicates that these same individuals are more likely to be ready to quit the behavioral health workforce. 15 times more likely, in fact. So individuals who wait to year 5 or later in their education, in their bachelor's journey, who wait till year 5 or later to choose behavioral health majors are 15 times more likely on average, with all other variables considered, to indicate their intent to leave the behavioral health workforce in the next 30 days. I'm just gonna let that sink in for a minute. So AHP identified at least 4 interrelated leaks in the behavioral health pipeline, starting all the way from the K-12 system through community colleges, bachelor's programs, and graduate programs. Although once folks got to graduate programs, there was a lot less evidence that there was a leak in the pipeline at that point. But there's evidence that turnover and retention issues are rampant in behavioral health, and that burnout has been increasing across the country, not just in Oregon. In turn, the awareness of that is increasing and influencing how people think about their career choice. This likely affects the pipeline starting from the very beginning, and that could be, for example, why it is so disproportionate that the odds of you being in the behavioral health workforce is so much higher if you have a parent or family friend that's already in the field. So unless an individual is predisposed or provided a differential framing of what it looks like to be in the behavioral health field, you're less likely to consider that as a career option. Coupled with the fact that folks aren't graduating from community colleges and bachelor's institutions at the same rate as non-behavioral health majors. And then you see students waiting longer to declare behavioral health as the major. These are 4 leaks along the pipeline that are really contributing to high levels, contributing at high levels to Oregon's behavioral health workforce crisis. And when I call it a crisis, I say that because AHP's findings indicate that 32 of Oregon's 36 counties lack even 1 provider per 1,000 residents. Okay, next slide, please. So in addition to those findings, licensure and training barriers came up in nearly every interview and focus group. Here you're looking at a snapshot of the map of behavioral health career pathways that was prepared by AHP. AHP started by identifying 60 different behavioral health credentials and licenses offered by 14 distinct certifying and licensing boards in Oregon. So as you can imagine, that's a lot of stakeholders involved in the credentialing process. Additionally, AHP used the available scopes of practice and identified key skills standards across these 60 credentials and licenses in the Oregon behavioral health workforce. They combined skills that were similar in order to avoid redundancy and to keep the list focused on more advanced skills relevant to providing the behavioral health services they were analyzing. In some instances, additional skills were included in a credential or license to offer a more comprehensive and accurate representation of the services that fall within that occupation. The careers are mapped based on their educational requirements. So starting on the left, you'll see a minimum degree needed for the role. Then next to that is the certifying or licensing body responsible, followed by the credential they offer. And finally, the occupation that that credential is tied to. This layout helps clarify how education and credentials connect to specific roles. And this snapshot features just a small portion of the pathways AHP developed. It's worth noting that when AHP analyzed both career pathways and skill assessment, they uncovered something in particular. Essentially, all jobs in these progressions share similar key skills based on the role. However, the regulatory laws defining who is legally able to provide certain services limits flexibility within these occupations. So as folks progress to these roles, there are specified supervised experience hours required at each level that, once met, grant an individual the ability to perform certain services. AHP uncovered that throughout the process of finding this information and mapping this out, it was extremely challenging and confusing, which in and of itself may present a barrier for folks looking to enter the behavioral health field and try to find where they might best fit in this spectrum. They also discovered that some pathways offer limited upward mobility, which would be useful to know as folks look to enter and find their space within the field. Progression may require additional education or supervised hours, and that can come at the expense of the individual. Additionally, higher education may not always yield a positive return on investment in these roles because in some cases, there's minimal opportunity for pay increases, there's minimal opportunities for upward mobility, and it makes that return on investment argument difficult. So this career and credential pathway map, again, this is just a snapshot of what I think is a 7-page document that is linked in your materials. This illustrates the complexity of the behavioral health workforce system as an additional barrier to growing and diversifying Oregon's behavioral health workforce. Next slide. So what do we do with all of these findings? Staff at the HEC, along with the governor's behavioral health initiative team and workforce policy advisor, are combing through the findings and recommendations to really identify promising next steps and strategies to address Oregon's behavioral health workforce crisis. Recommendations include increasing access and financial support for education, particularly with an equity lens, and more support for rural and frontier students in particular, as well as culturally and linguistically diverse groups. AHP heard a lot of strengths being shared about how some colleges and universities are providing access to virtual classes and thinking about different ways to increase access to more rural and frontier communities as well. In terms of entering the behavioral health workforce, collaborating with employers to create a more streamlined career pathway and support structures for folks who are entering the field is important. AHP heard from some colleges and universities who are already partnering with employers, and that seems to be a major strength for some of the higher education institutions in Oregon. In terms of advancement and retention opportunities, developing roles that are supported for advancement potential and stay within the defined scope of care is an important recommendation. And AHP recommends that Oregon work on developing clear career pathways. They also recommended further investigation into discrepancies between those completing their education inside versus outside of Oregon, both good and bad. What is Oregon doing well? What is being done differently elsewhere that we might be able to replicate? Additionally, looking at how behavioral health majors are chosen, AHP is seeing the results that had a significant impact on longevity within the field. So better understanding how we matriculate folks earlier in their bachelor's career into the behavioral health pathway will be important. And then better understanding what's driving burnout and turnover in the field. This can include a number of things well beyond the talent pipeline. There may be an educational component about preparing students for what day-to-day looks like in the field. But that's likely a small piece of what's going on in terms of workplace culture, supportive service and supervisory practices, workload and work-life balance. Last slide. From researchers to direct service professionals and providers, the voices informing this report reflect that Oregon is experiencing a behavioral health workforce staffing crisis. And in compiling this report with AHP, the HEC set out to really understand the full scope of the gaps and needs across the state. It's clear that the path to reinvigorating sustainable talent resources in the behavioral health field is going to be a multifaceted one. But the impact that it will have on the people of Oregon and our behavioral health workforce is well worth the effort. So next steps for this work involves the Healthcare Consortium convening a behavioral health workforce work group that will include members of the consortium and the steering committee that I mentioned advised on this project. I also want to note that the governor's recommended budget for the 25-27 biennium includes a $25.7 million investment in behavioral health workforce. And this assessment will inform the priority occupations and career pathways that will be the focus of that investment. And with that, I have no idea how I did on time, but I'm going to stop.
Thank you, Jennifer. I don't have the mic, but it's so sad to see the burnout rates that you talked about. It brings me back to thinking about caregivers and how they become patients. They themselves become patients when they get burned out. So thank you for sharing and look forward to the findings from your work groups.
Absolutely.
Any questions for Jennifer?
It just seems so hard to incentivize this. There's not pay, there's not a career path, and the work conditions are, and that's an ecosystem that has to do with how, the local community values that. And I don't know how to interrupt that vicious cycle. And I have family members, I'm not probably going to kill 1 year to deal with this. And it's extremely disheartening. So I don't know how you incentivize it long-term and get people to enter the field to start to reverse that. Almost seems like we have to subsidize it somehow to jumpstart it, but I just don't, it just seems like a very difficult problem to address. But I feel for it because I've had to deal with this personally, and
it's so true, and why the solution has to be multifaceted. We can't address issues and gaps at one part of the journey without thinking about it holistically. And I think for the Workforce and Talent Development Board, part of what was interesting about the housing production survey results and this talent assessment is how you all are thinking about broad workforce and talent development priorities and where you are seeing overlap. What you've just described is it resonates and is so similar to some of the pressures that the early care, child care and early care and education professional workforce is facing. And I also just think about some of the other pressure points in this study that are similar to things that we're experiencing in other sectors. And so that, to me, it seems like an opportunity for the Workforce and Talent Development Board to identify where are some of those broad themes that may not be sector specific.
Well, I'm also thinking about, this is hard to quantify, but there is a huge cost to this, not addressing these needs of the community that go into having an effective people who are effectively contributing or working, who are contributing to the system. And I think that's the ability to describe the true cost, financial cost to Oregon. I think is one thing that would really attract. It's not like the system, people who aren't getting services, saying that feeds in with overall huge cost to society as a whole. Not that's a dissatisfaction with your inability to contribute. Yeah, it's huge cost to earnings.
Thank you.
This back. Thank you, Jennifer. So we are running late, so I suggest we take a 5-minute break and be back here at 3 o'clock.
Yes, thank you. You want to bring up the slides. So because same time, we're just gonna.
I have. You want me to bring it up right now?
Yeah, we are gonna skip, we're gonna skip over the first couple of slides, which just provide context around Future Ready Oregon. So I'll point to those in your packet. But you all are fairly well familiar with Future Ready Oregon and its components. So I'm going to give Amy the floor to walk you through the year 3 annual results across all of the investments. So you could go, yep, keep scrolling, and Amy's going to kick it off from there. And with that, Amy, take it away.
Thank you, Jennifer. Good afternoon, everyone. Maybe go back just a minute, Jennifer, to that title slide. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be back at the Workforce and Talent Development Board today and talk to you again about what we have found to date on the Future Ready Oregon investment. For those of you who don't know me, and for the record, my name is Amy Cox. I'm the Director of the Office of Research and Data at the HEC. Our office is responsible for evaluating a number of post-secondary programs in the state, including Future Ready Oregon. And this will be a very high-level summary of the 3rd annual report. I say that because if you've looked at the report, I believe it's linked in your materials. It is quite long. That is by design. It details the progress to date and the outcomes for all 8 programs within Future Ready Oregon, as well as provides economic and educational landscape for the state to see how the progress to date relates to that, and then provides the beginning of really a holistic assessment that we will continue in the coming years as well. The work I will present you is really the product of a whole team of people. I am indebted to them. I will take your questions either while I present or afterward. I'm comfortable either way. Next slide, please. This year's report focuses on participants and services, and it is the first report to focus on initial employment outcomes for Future Ready Oregon. In particular, we look at who's been served, what services they've received, what those employment outcomes look like, how the different 8 programs continue to progress, and how all of this compares to Oregon's economic landscape. The goals of this program, both aimed at individuals and at the state, and at lots of levels in between communities, businesses, industries. The data sources are many listed here. I'm not going to go through them, but chief among them are data on participants and the services that they are offered and receive, that we work with the grantees to collect for this report to be able to track the investment. And also key to the evaluation are the 10 priority populations in the statute, laid out in the statute here on the slide. We pay particular attention to them and to all of these questions in terms of particular communities. Next slide, please. In general, the findings for this 3rd year are positive. We see continued progress in the program at many different levels in general. Through June of last year, more than 14,000 participants served, virtually all of whom come from low-income backgrounds, which is one of the 10 priority populations. In addition to that low-income background, 92% come from another priority population. So this is a set of investments that is reaching the communities it is designed to reach, and that the participants in which are more diverse than the labor force existing. Why is that important? It is important because of 2 reasons. The goals of this program are both to expand labor force and lower demand for labor, as well as to do so equitably. And so what we need to do is reach communities who are not as present in the labor force and who have not been as present in workforce training and education programs to date. They have received more than 45,000 services, which averages out to about 3 services per person. These services include both workforce training programs that range widely and can include resume building or career training in a particular career pathway, or general job searching, as well as support services, which can include tuition and fee remission, which was the most common support service, as well as support services like transportation resources or resources for jobs like uniforms or tools, or in-kind services like food support, housing support, childcare support. So a range of different support services as well. That's important because in this, that flexibility of funding is different in Future Ready Oregon than in some workforce training programs. These initial employment outcomes across all of these participants are laid out at the bottom. Some participants were not employed when they began the program that they engaged in, and some were employed. So we break them out into two groups. For those who were not employed, we found that about 2/3 were employed after services. I have been asked in other presentations about this report, why is that not 100%? And what I would say is that, first of all, we will continue to track folks. We looked just at that initial quarter after services. We'll continue to track them and also to see who is in education as well as who engages in employment later. So these are initial employment outcomes. These are not the end of the story, but that is a high employment rate for right after services for those who were not employed prior. When we look at other workforce training programs, it's a strong result. Wages for those who were employed. Remember I said some folks were employed before they participated in services and some were not. For those who were employed, their wages rose on average. We saw a median hourly wage increase of $3 an hour. So another positive finding in terms of this first round of employment outcomes. And then lastly, regardless of whether they were employed beforehand or not, those participants who were employed after the program, we found that almost half of them, 46%, were working in healthcare or manufacturing jobs. So healthcare industries or manufacturing industries. This is much higher, as you know, than the labor force in general, focused in healthcare and manufacturing. These are two of the three focus industries of Future Ready Oregon. So a third very positive result. Some of you may wonder, well, what about the third focus industry? That is really an industry sector. It's technology. It spans multiple industries, and so it's a little harder to be able to measure. So that's why this part is focused on healthcare and manufacturing. I also will call your attention to this call out box on the right that says low reporting of Social Security numbers means employment outcomes may not generalize to all participants. This is a fact. Not only the primary way, but almost the only way that we can track individuals' employment outcomes is with their Social Security number that we use to partner with the employment department and see the employment and earnings that they're engaged in or not. Without that Social Security number, we can't really follow those outcomes in the same way. If at all. And so we have worked quite a lot with the grantees and continue to do so to try and increase that number of Social Security numbers. Next slide. This is a slide that shows some finding highlights from each of the 8 programs. I'm not going to go through all of these. I know it's 3 o'clock on a Friday. But I do want to call your attention to a few things. Kim Parker-Janinas spoke well about some of the success of Prosperity 10,000. Prosperity 10,000, the data she referenced were to whatever her most recent data are. These are through June 30th of last year. So you'll see that that's why there's a difference. But the short answer there is that they are meeting the goals that they have in statute. It's the only one of the 8 programs that has specific numeric goals they're supposed to meet. But the other programs are doing well as well. The Workforce Ready grants have served both infrastructure grants and participants That funding is fully expended, and that work is underway, and the initial outcomes are positive. The asterisks there refer to these are programs where we have lower SSN reporting, and so we have some more work to do with the grantees and the grantees with the participants to try and increase that so we can get some more reliable data. The youth programs work is managed by the Department of Education's Youth Development Oregon, and that money is fully expended, but we will continue to track the outcomes of those participants going forward. Registered apprenticeships similarly is managed by the Bureau of Labor and Industries, but again, that money is fully expended, but we have those grants are done, but we will continue to track the participants going forward. Career Pathways is a program that happens at the community colleges. It continues, and we will be watching their credential attainment in particular, as well as what industries those folks are going into. And then the Credit for Prior Learning and Workforce Benefits Navigators and Industry Consortia are more focused on infrastructure building, but the Workforce Benefits Navigators also has a component of serving individuals. And so we are in the process. That's the last program to be stood up. We're in the process of starting to work with them to gather participant data. And I did see that there was a question in the chat.
Hi, this is Charlie Hopewell. What I kind of wanted to find out is when you're showing the data that I'm seeing, are these numbers that are in addition to a baseline year, or are these aggregated by the different service providers? So when we say X amount of services provided, if it was prior to Future Ready, then and they were servicing, I'll make up a number, 1,000, then is the numbers we're seeing here in addition to that baseline, or is it just the aggregate?
This is a good question. Future Ready Oregon is one-time funding. So this is standalone. There is other workforce training that happens in the state, obviously, prior to Future Ready Oregon. And that includes WIOA-funded programs. It includes programs at the community colleges. We have not done an accumulation across all of those to see, well, how much more or how different might it look. There are two reasons for that. One is because our first focus is to try and understand what is happening with Future Ready Oregon and report on that. We still have those other data. We can always go back and look at that and compare. But the other reason is because Future Ready Oregon is by design trying to do things differently. So there is this ongoing question about which participants it's serving and who it is serving in a different way that is not as comparable to existing work underway. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, what I'm trying to do is to find the effectiveness of Future Ready's processes. So when I read their second slide in, I look at 14,000 participants served. And my first question is, so how many of those within the time period of Future Ready would have been served by the existing programs that were already, let's say, in an agency or CBO or so forth. So that's what I'm trying to digest in my mind. So I think you did answer the question.
Yes, it's a critical piece of the evaluation of this program. I will say that this evaluation is multi-year. So it goes on for several years, and we will have a much better handle on those kinds of questions after more years are underway. The design of Future Ready Oregon is that it will be reaching new participants who would not have been served. Either new community and be more effective in that reach because of the focus on priority populations. That is a question that we will tackle more in the out years than right now. We'll just need some more years of data.
All right. Thank you very much.
Sure. Next slide. This slide gives a little more detail on these focused industries. these focus industries in the Future Ready Oregon statute. It comes from the chapter that talks about the economic landscape and the projection for workers, the need for workers in these different industries. And the bottom line here is really that these industries continue to have a strong projected need. And so we are looking at both which participants are employed in them afterward, as well as what kinds of trainings are being provided that are in these areas. So next slide. This is a little bit more about that, that question that I just raised about what trainings are being provided in these areas. This is on the left. There's a pie chart that shows the different fields that topic-based education and training is in. So these are, almost a fourth are in the healthcare related fields. There's a smaller amount in technology related fields, but there is also a sizable pie in manufacturing. You see mechanic repair and precision production. So those focus industries, at least in terms of healthcare and manufacturing, are getting attention, but so are, of course, several other kinds of career fields. We are on the right is the beginning of credential attainment. So we're tracking which participants go on to earn educational credentials, whether those are CTE certificates or stackable career credentials or degrees in particular areas. And this and the slide on the right shows the breakdown of that. Next slide, please. We began this multi-year evaluation with these two questions based on the statute of whether Future Ready Oregon is leading to greater economic security, not only for individuals, as I mentioned, but also for communities and businesses and the state, and whether Future Ready Oregon is improving equity, especially leading with racial equity across all the different areas, the training, the employment, the industries, and eventually, we're not there yet, but career advancement. This is the first year that we've started to actually return to these questions and answer them. And what we are seeing in this interim period, again, it's not the final end of the story, but what we are seeing is that the initial answers to these questions are yes. We are seeing employment outcomes that are strong and that are occurring across the different priority populations. That is a very important finding. If we more often, we will see in some kinds of post-secondary education and training programs, well, this is really doing well for this group, but this group is lagging. We're seeing pretty consistently high service completion rates, employment, and wage increases across the Future Ready Oregon programs and across the different priority populations. One caveat that I have in the lower right here is that we do not see older workers as well represented among participants. One of the priority populations is communities who might face, or individuals who are more likely to face employment discrimination based on age. That includes both younger workers and older workers. And we do not see older workers as well represented among the participants. It's the only group among the 10 priority populations where we see underrepresentation. Next slide. And the report finishes with 4 overall findings and recommendations. The first overall finding is that we did find strong connection to priority populations and their strong representation among participants, as well as those consistent outcomes, as I said. This is something that we do not believe happened by accident, but because of the many ways that the programs and the grantees have engaged communities and partners in new ways. That work of their engagement of community partners is detailed in this and earlier reports. And we believe we're starting to see really the effect of that because of these consistent outcomes. And so the first recommendation is really to continue that work. Do not stop just because it is easy to return to a default, shall we say. So maintain those partnerships. The second overall finding is that Future Ready Oregon programs are leaning heavily toward younger individuals. You may laugh, as I do, since I am now older, that adults at the indicator here of 40 and older, that we didn't come up with that definition. That's a national definition. But that they are underrepresented among participants. And so the second recommendation is really to increase engagement and outreach to Oregonians over age 40. That's important not only for the state's adult educational attainment goal, but part of the reason for that adult educational attainment goal is to meet workforce needs. And we're not going to be able to meet those workforce needs if we do not reach Oregonians at all ages. So next slide, please. And then third, I'll return to this piece about Social Security numbers. There is this lower range of Social Security number reporting in some of the programs is really hampering our ability to tell the full story of the impact of the investment. And that is the participation is only sort of the means to the end, right? We want to be able to enable individuals to get into careers where they can earn a family wage, where they can have career advancement, where they can have steady employment. And we can't track those things if we don't have someone's Social Security number. So that's the third recommendation, to improve the data collection. And then I know it's not exciting, but it's so important. And then the last overall finding is really a call out at this interim point. It's not based on the fact that we found a problem as much as we don't want to wait till the end of the time period to bring up an issue. And that is that we don't know yet how many of the participants really have long-term unemployment and disengagement from the labor force and are coming in and will expand the labor force, and how many participants are coming in order to skill up or to improve their labor market position. And so we need both in this program. That's what the investment is designed for. It's not the responsibility of any single grantee, but we do want to call attention to make sure that grantees are engaging Oregonians who are long-term not employed, so that we can have that expanded labor force that is so needed in the state. And with that, I will stop. That was a highway speed description of the report, but I'm sure there may be other questions. So please, if you haven't all fallen asleep on a Friday afternoon, please feel free to ask them.
Thank you, Amy. Jennifer has a comment.
I just have a question, Ben. Thanks so much, Amy. Is Charlie still on his question? I just wanted to circle back to the question about participation, and we skipped over the initial framing slides, but I just want to remind folks the two largest investments in Future Ready Oregon were in Prosperity 10,000 and the Workforce Ready grants, and those were intended to complement one another, where Prosperity 10,000 allows for local workforce development boards to invest in and respond to regionally identified workforce needs. The Workforce Ready grants are a statewide investment intended to respond to statewide workforce priorities in healthcare, manufacturing, and technology. So Charlie, to your question, I think Kim Parker-Jonanas had to sign off. But Willamette Workforce Partnership has some statistics about the number of their Prosperity 10,000 participants who are participating in the public workforce system for the first time. So they have no prior history of engagement with the public workforce system. While that is a very specific and discrete example and statistic, it may help to answer some of your question, but I'm not going to cite that statistic because I don't remember the numbers specifically, but Kim it would be a great follow-up for her to provide that. I've heard her report that out in a number of instances.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer, for that. I think from being just a member of the Workforce Talent Development Board, I just think that when we make an investment in something to see an improvement, it's important to first of all establish a baseline and then measure off of that baseline moving forward, because it's a little bit like there has been tremendous effort in the workforce development system, as we're all aware, but we're throwing efforts as well as dollars in a lot of places, and those get commingled, and we lose a little bit of granularity that I think is maybe necessary for measurement to say, did this investment actually make a difference? And again, a local workforce board could have gotten funds from 5 different places, and one of them was incredibly effective and 3 of them weren't. So I think that's what I'm trying to get at. So thanks.
Thank you, Jennifer and Amy. So we should go to the last agenda item, which is the strategic plan and scorecard. We're almost caught up on time, I guess. Are you presenting today? Do you need the microphone? Todd is presenting. Todd, it's all yours.
Well, thank you so much. Apologize. It's getting dark back here in DC, so the lighting is a little weird. That said, I did talk to Chair Dunn, Sherry Dunn, prior to the meeting, and we're kind of at one of those places we were back in 2020, 21 into 22, where we had a number of reports with findings and recommendations coming at us. And so we're excited to take some of these reports, the housing and construction reports, behavioral health report, the Future Ready report, and bring those to the next exec and likely to our next strategic planning meetings, and have conversations on what next steps for the WTDB might be. So stay tuned for that. Clay and I just wanted to give you a brief, and thank you for your patience. I know we're going a little bit over, but Clay and I just wanted to give you a sort of brief summary of what happened at our recent strategic plan retreat that member Adrian Bennings hosted up at PCC on March 4th. We basically, to no surprise really to many of us, reconfirmed our formal adoption and commitment to NGA's high performing state workforce board model, which for those of you who might not remember or don't know, it really kind of broadens the scope beyond the public workforce system or the 13 WIOA programs of WorkSource Oregon in our state, to include a couple of key partners worth mentioning, which are K-12 and the university system, but it's even more than that, which Clay will speak to in a moment here. And then we also talked about roles and responsibilities of the board, which Clay is going to speak to. So I'll start off with some comments about the themes that came up during the retreat generally. There's 6 of them. Number 1 was the WTDB strengths are about understanding the system and its players in the data, and to leverage those strengths around convening, drawing correlations, sense making, strategy, policy, and advising. Next, the WTDB cannot just ask for the governor's ear. We need to earn it. We need to find threads that the governor's that connect to the governor's current priorities. As we know, affordable housing, early education, behavioral health, and really be the one that provides understanding, that leverages relationships, optimizes the reporting and alignment of data to drive decision making, to realize better results and have more impact. Thirdly, we talked about sort of 3 tiers of metrics, because part of this strategic planning session was about our ongoing and evolving scorecard. Those 3 tiers of metrics were around board effectiveness, public workforce outcomes, as well as that larger workforce system I talked about a few minutes ago. Is there a question? Okay. So there were, I'm going to give you the truncated version here. A 4th theme was vision for shared metrics. on our scorecard that are across that larger system. And that should be a main focus. As a fifth theme, it was talked about pretty extensively that the WTDB has a responsibility to know the directives that they need to operate under. So our roles and responsibilities as dictated not only by the Code of Federal Regulations or federal law, but also ORS, our bylaws, and other sources that provide clarity around that role, that responsibility, and our roles. And last, we had a discussion around effectiveness and use of board meeting time. We kind of flipped from where we came from a few years ago to thinking that maybe we should go back to having report outs from our committees. Made a lot of sense to folks, and then to spend a bit more time once we get the scorecard piece completed around analysis of that scorecard data and what's working well, what's not, and what we can do to improve. With that, I'll toss it over to Clay to talk about the systems distinction as a reminder and help those that might be new to this conversation, and then also about ever-evolving roles and responsibilities of the board. Clay?
Thanks, Todd. I want to show a couple of things quickly, and hopefully this will be good information for all. Second. So this first two slides that I want to show are essentially things that we have shown before in various meetings and for various purposes, but just to outline and give everyone an overview of the workforce system as we understand it. And in particular, to connect to what Todd said about the National Governors Association High Performing Workforce Board guidance around how state boards can engage with a broader workforce system. This is what you see here is what we call WorkSource Oregon. It is the primary programs that are engaged and available in WorkSource Oregon centers. These programs are identified by the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act and further defined by an agreed upon definition for WorkSource Oregon that came before the WTDB, I think about a year ago, maybe a little bit more. But at any rate, this is a definition that we've all agreed to, local boards, state agencies, and the WTDB. It includes the Employment Department and all the various services that they provide. Higher Education Coordinating Commission kind of split into two pieces with adult education on one side and then the Title I services, which is the adult dislocated worker and youth services. And then Department of Human Services, I'll say with self-sufficiency programs, TANF and SNAP. And then vocational rehabilitation services, which includes both the Department of Human Services and the Commission for the Blind. And all of these things kind of flow down through local workforce boards and are sort of delivered through WorkSource Oregon centers. That's not a 100% match, but many of the services are primarily available through WorkSource Oregon centers. So that is kind of WorkSource Oregon. This next slide kind of shows a little different picture. It includes WorkSource Oregon, but then identifies all of the things that are around the system that are also connected to the system. Post-secondary education in particular is very important to workforce. Obviously, most folks who experience post-secondary education are doing so for a job or a career. So that's clearly something connected to workforce. And and that extends down into K through 12, but in particular, things like career technical education, the CTE programs that are available in K through 12. Community-based organizations, now if you're down in the lower left, there are a number of community-based organizations that provide education and training, but also supportive services and culturally specific services that aren't necessarily available in other areas or for all populations. Kind of going counterclockwise, you look then at labor and apprenticeship, the number of programs there. Oregon tribes, the Oregon tribes in terms of WIOA get their own allocation of WIOA funding. And they have independent programs, but aligned programs and opportunities to partner. There are additional partners over here, including, Oregon Housing and Community Services, Job Corps, HUD, Youth Build, and others, and some connected and allied partners with, unemployment insurance, paid leave, and others. And so this is just a high-level overview. We'll make sure that you get this as a good reference to sort of have a broad understanding of who's included in the system. The other thing that I wanted to share is an evolving process where we are working on identifying roles and responsibilities. These are not things, as you probably, most of you have heard in the past, these are not things that we have come up with on our own, but these are things that are defined in WIOA, the federal law that governs the state board, as well as state law. A number of things have been either emphasized or clarified or Oregonized or expanded on in state law. And so this is a detailed list of those roles and responsibilities that are gleaned from those various sources. And I'm not going to go through it all because it's a lot, but I will kind of help you to understand it so when you do look at it, you have a sense of what you're looking at. First, these are grouped by high-level categories. So this first group is planning and priorities. The strategic plan that Todd just mentioned and the retreat that happened toward the strategic plan and scorecard, that is established looking at the source. That sort of originates from the WTDB's bylaws, but it also is something that comes out of WIOA. WIOA expects the state board to have a vision and high-level strategy and priorities for the system. Currently, the implementer is board staff. This is something that Todd is lead on and has been the primary coordinator of this effort, working with Lindsay Woolsey, who's our consultant. The approval delegation is something that we talked about at the retreat. In some cases, there are a number of these roles and responsibilities that board members may not be fully aware of or may not be conscious of on a sort of ongoing day-to-day basis. And they may be being handled by others connected to the board, but not necessarily the board directly. So this formal, informal, which you'll see, just means whether the board has made a sort of conscious decision. I'll say conscious. That's probably the wrong word, but a conscious decision to delegate or not delegate. And this could be by board action. It could be by, a board discussion. It could be by, some other form where the board has been engaged in deciding that. But yes, an informal would then be a situation where the board has not been conscious of that delegation. So this particular workforce strategic plan or WTDB strategic plan has been sort of formally identified and retained, not delegated, by the WTDB. And since it sort of does provide high-level priorities for the system, the impact is high. So I'm gonna skip a little bit. Again, I'm not gonna go through all of these directly. The next section is policy and guidance. There are a number of things that we have to do as a board related to policy. And I wanted to point out here that this is a pretty high level role and responsibility. And so, I've indicated here many implementers, and, this varies by impact and whether or not we've been more or less conscious of it or not. So that's how to kind of interpret that one. I want to look at one more under this section to say that this idea of identifying regions and designating local areas, this is a responsibility of the governor, but the WTDB plays the primary role in making the recommendation to the governor. We also establish WTDB policy around this particular issue. In the past, this has been handled by OE staff and not by board staff. As you know, board staff is pretty small. It's Todd, myself, and Aaliyah. We get help from others, and it is a growing staff. Julia Steinberger, who's not with us today, is expanding some of our footprint by including some business engagement staff. You'll hear more about that in the future. But this effort, this particular policy area, was something that was handled by the Office of Workforce Investment staff, and it's moving to the board. It was delegated and is moving to not delegated. The impact of this particular area is low because all the areas have been designated. So there's not much that we can do there in that particular arena. I'll jump down to programs and services. Here is one where career pathways, strategies to support career pathways. This is something that the board staff are not really particularly involved in, but HEC staff are significantly with, particularly with community colleges, but also with the university system. This is one that I call informal, where the board itself hasn't necessarily made a decision to delegate that, but it has been delegated to others. And HEC staff is the one that's responsible for it. Just a couple more, again, more for orientation. Develop and implement the system itself. This is one that I've identified the implementer as agency directors and local board directors. This is, I believe, this group of folks you would see as that first slide I showed you, which was sort of the org chart, which is WorkSource Oregon. The agency directors would be the heads of those agencies that are identified on that chart, and then the local board directors below that. There is a couple of things that I want to show you. Here's an item, work with the Oregon Business Development Commission, that I just want to show you. It has nothing here under implementer and so on, because we don't really do that. It's one of our responsibilities, but we don't really currently do that. And so it's something that we'll look at as things move forward. But at the present time, this is something that we're not currently engaged with. And there are a few items on here that are like that. And I think that's kind of a good overview. This is something that would, I believe, be a good thing to kind of spend a little bit of time on, because as Todd identified, this item here, one of the things that was discussed at the retreat was this idea that we need to be more, we need to take more responsibility for knowing what it is we should be doing and making those conscious decisions about whether we're going to delegate it to others or retain it, and if we're going to retain it, how we're going to accomplish it. So that's a high level overview, Todd. I don't know if you want to jump in and kind of close it up. I'll stop sharing.
Thanks so much, Clay. Appreciate the great information. Again, sort of the goal here, this is our third iteration of the roles and responsibilities. It's complex. It's a lot in terms of what we're responsible for as a board. So in that spirit, with Lindsay Woolsey's help, at the retreat, it was decided that with her guidance and facilitation, that it would be great if we could, as Clay showed you, delegate those things that are already essentially delegated to other staff, or things that we determine maybe not things that have a potential high impact with our board. So can we reduce these 60 different items within these categories that Clay just showed us to a smaller handful of items that have high impact potential that we can focus on, so it's more manageable, more efficient, and ultimately provides better outcomes for the customers that we serve, both on those sides of the job seeker and the employers. I also wanted just to say thank you, Jennifer Purcell, for coming today and sharing the great information about the behavioral health assessment and report. I appreciate your willingness to try and speed things up, along with Amy Cox. Thank you very much for coming today and sharing about Future Ready Oregon. Apologies for being rushed today and the clunkiness of Sherry and I not being there in person. And last and definitely not least, Venkat, thank you so much for pinch hitting as the vice chair and running the meeting today. I really appreciate it. Excited very much so to move the strategic plan and scorecard work forward. We've got 3 more meetings scheduled to get to those completed deliverables, March 21st, 28th, and I believe April 4th. So thank you all for coming today.
Thank you, Todd and Clay, for that presentation. And I just wanted to say, coming out of that retreat, I felt that I didn't know, and I'm sure many board members with me also didn't know the amount of work that staff has to go through. So looking at that list, just wanted to extend some appreciation for what Clay and Todd and Elliot do. So thank you. Any questions for Clay or Todd? Okay, thank you all for coming, and apologies that we went over slightly, but have a good weekend, everybody, and I'll adjourn the meeting.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.